around with you. That was my only chance before I went away to make my feelings known. And if you turn me down, there'll be no reason to stay, so I need to know. 'Cause I don't wanna go. If you feel the same way that I feel since I first noticed you, there's nothing left for me, and there's nothing left to lose, so I made my move. I introduced myself, we had a drink or two, we'd only just begun, but I already knew. That was my only chance before I went away to make my feelings known. And if you turn me down, there'll be no reason to stay, so I need to know. 'Cause I don't have to go. That was my only chance before I went away to make my feelings known. And now you turn me down, there is no reason to stay, 'cause I already know. And now I have to go. And now I have to
So, power pop. It's a bit of a crazy genre because, you know, I'm lucky to sort of consider myself part of the power pop world, and luckily enough, you know, a lot of my heroes and a lot of people that I work with and a lot of the big players in the power pop world are easily contactable, which is great for this podcast, and it's also, you know, been a big help for me in terms of the musicians that I've worked with, in terms of promotion. And one of the biggest players in the power pop world is Bruce Brodeen, who was the head of Not Lame Recordings for 16 years, and they sold over 15,000 different CDs just in the power pop genre. And I'm lucky to have Bruce Brodeen with me right now. How are you doing?
I'm doing hunky-dory. How are you doing, Pablo?
I'm good. I'm already liking the David Bowie reference there.
You know, it's funny. I get when you get asked that all the time, and I just hate sort of giving those rote trite kind of responses. And for like 15 years, I'll slip in the hunky-dory into the everyday and interactions with the general public. And very frequently I hear, nobody's ever said that. I've never heard that before. Because it's better than saying, I'm good.
That is right, but at the same time, that shows that they haven't listened to enough David Bowie in their life.
No. Very rarely. I think in all those years, I've never had anybody retort back to me saying, "That's a really good Bowie record."
So, well, I have the argument with my friend all the time. His favorite album is Ziggy Stardust, and mine's Hunky Dory. So, where do you stand?
Well, mine's The Man Who Sold the World.
Ah, okay. Any particular favorite tracks from that, or is it just the whole album?
You know, the whole The Width of the Circle, definitely. Ronson's work on that record, I think, when you put it in its contextual time and place,
yeah,
I think was revelatory. I think he just had this searing, tight, concise, metallic, ringing guitar sound that just emitted rock and roll fucking cool. And for its time and place, it made just a very unique statement. And I bought the original In Drag cover version of it when it was at Woolworths. And I can tell you the date because get a load of the records I picked up on this date. And we're geeking out here.
Yeah, this is what this is all about. So,
but it's all relevant here, and I'm gonna tie it together for you. But on that date, for 94 cents each, I picked up on January 10th, 1975, I picked up the following: the drag cover of Bowie, "The Man Who Sold the World," which was my third Bowie record at that time. I was 12 years old then, and Big Star's "Radio City,"
Nice.
which literally changed my life.
Okay.
Like that day, the skies opened up, and that was probably one of the most revelatory, epiphany-ridden experiences I certainly had up to that point, but still to this day. And and then I bought Gilbert O'Sullivan.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
a writer, not a fighter.
Yep. I love Gilbert O'Sullivan.
Yeah, that record's awesome. Half that record it's still just so brilliant to me.
Yeah, he still writes great stuff as well. Have you heard some of his later stuff?
I have not. I lost touch with him about maybe 15 years ago. And I sort of kept up with what he was doing over the years, but it just became a matter of mass.
Yes.
Just so much, and I just sort of reflexively revert to the classic staples by him.
Totally. Well, I would recommend Piano Foreplay if.
Okay, I'm writing it down right now.
If you get a chance, that was around 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, just tremendous. Really, if he ever lost whatever he had, it returned with that album, and he's just had it ever since.
That's great, oh, man. That's high praise, and I am going to follow through with that praise.
Excellent. Well, you talk about an epiphany moment, and I talk about this all the time as well. But I love that I can tell you this, and I told Roger Manning this as well. I discovered Jellyfish through the Land of Pure Imagination album. And it was "Wish It Would Rain." That was the track that completely just, like you say, just opened up the skies and
wow,
you knocked down the crate. It was the bridge in particular.
You were late to the party, but man, that's an interesting intro to the band.
Yeah, well,
I think that record's utterly brilliant. I mean, and just his solo work is so grossly underrated, I think, and underappreciated, even by maybe Jellyfish Nation. To some degree, I think all the elements, all the archetypes, and the greatness that are sort of embedded in the DNA of the Jellyfish sound are fully present on his solo work, and just obviously filtered just through his talent, his genius. But to me, they stand. His solo work stands boldly, courageously alongside the two Jellyfish records.
I totally agree with that. Well, as you say, I was late to the party. I discovered Jellyfish when the album came out, I think around 2006, 2007. And my first direct exposure to the band was through the Not Lame box set.
Yay! All right.
Even before the two albums, which was pretty cool. So, because I'd probably, like a lot of people, wondered how, and I think it says it in the notes as well. How come a band with two albums was able to have a box set, of demos and stuff like that. So, that I think shows how dedicated you are to the power pop genre as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting story how that came about from my perspective, my experience, and it was in 1999. Shortly after Not Lame released the Posies box set, which was a very comprehensive 4 CD box set. And the A&R guy for EMI Special Products here in the United States, a great guy, Kevin Flaherty, contacted me through, after hearing about some of the work of the label. I was releasing a lot of CDs at that time. I think in 1999, the label released 12 albums, which was a lot for a small indie label in Colorado. And the Posies box set amongst them. And he was trying to launch this project internally at EMI with no success, and as a fan. And he was frustrated by the powers that be. And it wasn't going to go anywhere. It wasn't going to get green-lighted in any shape, manner, or form. And he had done some preliminary work, and he just sort of shot across the bow to me, saying, hey, would this be something you're interested in? And it was like, but of course.
Yeah.
And, lo and behold, little did I think we both know that it would take, have this long gestation period. And it took really three years of research and work and getting all the elements together and getting the right kind of talent to deal with the artwork and that layout, that layout in the middle of the booklet there with the girl,
Yes.
with all her jellyfish paraphernalia. I mean, I was so obsessed with having the band sort of be represented and encapsulated in some sort of appropriate homage. And we got this photographer and got all these elements together from some fans in Los Angeles and did this photo shoot. And I'm trying to remember, I want to say just for that one shot, I think I spent $1,500. And that was how crazy it was. And and it was just a lot of very detailed work to sort of get that to the finishing spot, and it certainly was well worth it. But one of the funny stories connected to, well, it's not a funny story, I guess. It's just sort of a footnote of it, was that EMI kind of changed the rules of how this project had to come out.
Okay.
And I had to run the manufacturer through their pipeline. And with the cost for the box set was going to be significantly more. But it was just, they changed the rules, EMI, with how the production of the project had to be. I had to run it through them. I couldn't use it through my manufacturer and have my price breaks and all this. So it increased the cost quite a bit. But one of the things that was a really big issue is that I had to pay for it up front. And what the great thing is that it was doing really well and people were really excited. I think it sold about 7,000 copies when it was all said and done in its 2-year run, which is a lot for a box set.
Yes.
And especially even back then, with the height of the music industry, I think was doing really well then. It was in terms of sales, it was a perfect time for it to come out to reach its full potential, I think, in terms of the CD market. So I had to mortgage my house to get a bridge loan to manufacture to the tune of $220,000.
Ouch. Okay.
It was I think that's what it was, but it was a lot of money that I certainly didn't have. But it really was only for 10 days. I needed it. So it was a happy ending in the end.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to very far into that particular release, because I just want to ask you a ton of questions about that, and and obviously about the new book that's coming out via Pop Geek Heaven. Is Pop? I know it's a website that sort of encapsulates power pop and promotes bands and talks about it and everything. But is Pop Geek Heaven going to be a publishing company now, or?
No, it's really Not Lame Media.
Okay.
It's sort of what we call a designation here in the United States, LLC, a limited liability company.
Okay.
With that, and I publish other books outside of music.
You do the Ken Sharp books.
Yeah, except Ken did it sort of under his own imprint. I just took care of all the marketing and sales in order to fulfill it with his books.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, with regards to the box set, just a couple of questions. This might be common knowledge, but I don't know. Where did you get the girl from for the inside cover? Yeah,
great question. And the march of time, sort of ever surges forward and becomes fuzzier. But as I recall, she was either the wife of oh man, this is I forget. Please forgive me if
Oh no,
anybody
no, no.
remembers this and says, no, Bruce, you're absolutely wrong, because I'm not one of those detailed, fact obsessed kind of people. I live very much Zen like in the moment. And when the moment's done, it just sort of goes into the rear view mirror and fades.
Yes.
And I believe she was the wife or girlfriend of possibly the photographer. She was a fan, though, as I recall, not like to this degree that you see in the center spread inside the box set. For those listening that don't know what I'm talking about, it's well worth. I imagine it's out there on the internet. And
there is someone. I can't remember how they did it. I think they cut that girl out and put her on the spilt milk cover.
Yeah,
there's a version of that around the internet.
I didn't know that.
So because I'm assuming this is probably an obvious thing as well, but she is the girl off the spilt milk cover. Is that the correlation there?
No, it's not. It's
not really. It's just because they both got red hair, so I just kind of assumed that.
Yeah,
that was
no, it's not. It was just one of those. I'm pretty sure of that. I don't know. I think there might have been some talk about tracking her down at some point, but that was my recollection is no.
Yeah, no, not that it was actually her. Just that was the sort of concept behind it, sort of thing. Because there's been a lot of talk about that online as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. But for those that are listening that don't know what we're talking about here, what we had in the collage that was done was this really great photo shoot of she was supposed to look sort of like an adolescent kind of girl, mid-late adolescent girl, although she wasn't. And she's in her room, and she's just filled, and the whole room is just filled with official Jellyfish paraphernalia. You name it: CDs, posters, postcards, promotional swag, T-shirts, posters, retail hanging gliders, and all kinds of stuff. And it's just all gathered up and strewn out on her floor in her bed in her room. And there's the classic Jellyfish logo there, and she's just sort of looking kind of winsome and fully immersed in some sort of kind of moody projection, but sort of, but it's still very loving. And it's really cool. It's just a really, really great shot, and I think it was very, very appropriate.
It really is
for the type of project that that fan club turned out to be, which was a real obsessive, fully immersive, at least at that time, tribute to the band. Because one of the things that really surprised me, as this project sort of took root and sort of came into being, and certainly after it shipped, was how much I kind of underestimated their influence. I mean, I knew this was a big band. It was a big band for me, and for thousands of other people too. But normally, as you go about your daily life, you just sort of think you live in this sort of island unto yourself, separated from all the other fans around the world. But when this project happened, it was like, wow, this is a cult band. And I don't think I had in 1999 the grasp at how that they were a cult band. They were really popular, influential, important band, no question.
So they were seen as that even in 1999, because obviously their status has kind of grown a lot since then.
I think so, and I think the box set certainly helped with that. But more importantly, obviously, it's the music and the musicians connected to that much more certainly. But when you have a band that released 2 records and you have a box set of 4 CDs of completely unreleased material, there's something going on.
Yeah.
That's rippling to the shores, saying, "Hey, pay attention to me." It was very much a legacy piece, and I think it did the band that in that legacy real proud and real well, and help all the other activity. And now, the next years later, you have Omnivore doing just a great job with the work that they've been doing the last few years.
Yes.
With slicing and dicing that legacy and repackaging it in new and exciting and appropriate ways.
There's such I've got so many questions.
And keeping that music, and most importantly, keeping it in print and available.
Yes.
Because that's one of the things that is so tragic right now, and it's something that is I'm really passionate about, is that there's just so much lost, unreleased, forgotten, and unknown music in many, many different music genres that is just being blown to the sands of time and just being lost forever, because we have this huge glut of supply and data bits and information with music that's constantly coming online. And constantly being released, that a lot of this legacy in many different genres, certainly not just power pop, but any music genre, that really might have been ignored or just sort of set aside in the past, is really, truly getting lost.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be the case for Jellyfish, thank God.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad that it's kind of weird that, well, that image for a start has a lot to answer for, because I blame that image for me spending a lot of my student loan trying to find a lot of the stuff that was on that image. Yeah, I think it's some point.
Really? Wow.
Oh yeah, I mean, this isn't me trying to show off or anything, but I've even been told by the band that I've got the biggest collection that they've seen now.
Yeah, I've heard that that you have now achieved that. So that warms my music loving soul.
At some point there'll be a documentary
people like you, or look at a shot like that, put it under a little microscope, and say, okay, what is this? And you do your inquiries and you search it out. Hey, you know what? I was gonna give this away. I got a cool one of a kind present for you.
Oh, okay.
When I ship you the book when it comes out, I have something really unique.
That's really exciting.
That is truly a one of a kind thing, connected to the box set. And I'm not much on sort of just nostalgia, I guess.
Yeah.
And I can't think, as I'm talking to you and have gotten to know you over the past month, this past year, I can't think of a more appropriate and loving home to send this to.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to seeing what it is. Okay, well, I do have some very small. I mean, what I want to do is really get into your past a little bit, and I know you said that you sort of, don't really sort of think about the past too much, but I think a lot of people would love to hear about how you started. But what I want to do, there are a couple of questions about the box set that are just out of interest, and you may be able to answer them. And I think the fans would like to know as well. Did the success of the fan club set lead to the best CD?
It did. There's a Billboard article, and I'm going to find a scan of this and share that with the pre-order list as well, that came out in early 2003, maybe it was late 2012. And it was on the front page of Billboard, which is a music industry trade magazine. Very big deal. And it talked about the box set project. So it was a really cool. No, it wasn't on the cover. I'm sorry. Not Lame was on the cover of Billboard in 1997 when they did something on the Power Pop back then. But no, this was an article inside, but it was a big article. And basically what happened was the president of EMI found out about the box set and saw the sales numbers that it did. Because they took care of all the royalty distribution and did all that work.
Yeah.
that I didn't have to worry about, and I paid a pretty substantial administration fee to EMI for that, but it was well worth it because there was so many complexities with the licensing of this material. It was just crazy complex. But the president of EMI found out about the project, and he's basically like, "Why the?" And he was really angry, I guess. I guess there was a meeting. This is according, I think, to Kevin Flaherty. Like, why the fuck didn't we do this project? Why did we license? Why wasn't this done in house?
Okay.
And and that just sort of, but that's the way things happened with the large labels back then. They just had a very poor, ignorant understanding of the legacies of their work.
Yeah.
And the importance and influence a lot of these so-called minor artists had, where they just did a corporate collective shrug and said whatever. And they weren't nimble. They weren't fleet of foot, and couldn't come around to sort of looking at saying, "Hey, let's see what we can do. This is in our family. Let's do this."
Yeah.
And they just didn't want to allocate the resources. And I think things have changed more so, and certainly the numbers of selling reissue projects have dropped dramatically. But back in the day, I tried to license a lot of stuff from different major labels in the legacy of power pop as a music genre. And back, it was so frustrating because they had these insane minimums, and that just would never happen. And it would be like you had to press 5,000 copies, 10,000 copies through their production pipeline.
Yeah.
And these were releases that would, only if lucky, sell 1,000 or 2,000 copies, maybe 3,000 in a great, awesome world. And they just couldn't accept that it was meritorious of doing a project that sold those kinds of numbers, and of course no concern for the historical cover aspect and dimension of such projects.
Yeah.
And I think actually the industry is in a better place now from a corporate standpoint than it was 10, 15 years ago, with sort of being a little more fleet and being a little more appreciative of their responsibility to the babies that they have in their nursery.
Oh, absolutely. And, that sort of comes to is evidenced on things like Record Store Day when you see these beautiful limited edition.
Yeah, great example. Yeah.
This is a small thing, but I've always wondered this. How come? And if you don't know, it's cool. But how come Eric and Jason didn't have any notes, any liner notes in the book? Were they interviewed for it?
That's a really good question, and I don't.
I'd assume that Jason was.
I would imagine there might have been some sort of elbowing of some sorts, possibly. I think that was not a decision made by me. With that, Kevin was the facilitator of that. That's a good question, though. Nobody's ever asked me that.
I'm guessing Jason was probably still.
I guess I kind of. From Jason's standpoint, for Belly Button, that would have been appropriate, especially in light of where he stood in the landscape of certainly power pop at that time, but also as a musician recording on a major label at that time.
Well, I assume it may have been because of the bad blood between him and Andy at the time, and maybe he just wanted to completely distance himself from it.
I'm not sure about the bad blood thing there.
Do you think that's a bit of a myth? Or?
I think Andy just has a very different way. This is speaking strictly hypothetically. Yeah. But he has, probably not unlike myself in a way, just a lack of engagement or interest in the past.
Yeah.
It's, what matters is, what's going on right now and where things are going to. And I know he looks very warmly, certainly now, back on relationships with people connected to the band and the legacy of it. And that's a really, really good thing.
That is, I think that was the main thing that I picked up from the interview with Craig Dorfman, is that the myth around Andy, that and I got that from your chat with him as well for your podcast, that he's not some angry loner kind of guy. He's just a normal guy, sort of thing. It was good to know that he's just he's not. There's no bitterness or anger or wanting to distance himself from what Jellyfish was or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I can't speak to that personally. Only anecdotally.
Yeah.
From conversations with working with Craig over the last 7 years, as this project has moved with the biography moved forward. But I think that's one of the I wouldn't say that I was surprised. It's just that I think the expectation from a lot of music fans connected to cult kind of bands is that the musicians all have some sort of emotional, deeply embedded perspective and point of view related to their body of work from the past. Where it's kind of like going back to high school, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
Where it's just like I just went to it like some years back to my 30th high school reunion. I graduated high school in 1981, and I'd never been to a reunion before in my life. And I figured, you know what? If I haven't gone to one, I'll go to one now. And I did that, and I was just shockingly out of sync and disconnected to all these people that I went to high school with. I just had no relational, meaningful, substantial connection to them, which was fine.
Yeah.
It just was, but it was kind of.
They always seem like a bit like a forced sort of situation, don't they? I've been invited to sort of high school reunions, and it's like I didn't keep in contact with these people. It's just. We have the option to do that now because of Facebook and everything.
And it's not because of anything negative. It's just that you get caught into a flow. Yeah. Streams of our lives have many tributaries, and there's a gravitational, natural flowing force that pushes things along, and they just separate from the shores of different parts of our past, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And it's as it should be. And sometimes we wash back up onto those familiar places, and it's nice, but they just sort of go there. So I got a funny feeling it might be something like that, but only Andy and the others can talk about that, not you or I. We're just anything that we do here is just going to be conjecture with that. But the most important thing is that everybody connected to the Jellyfish story, with probably really only one exception, was contacted and interviewed for the complete total story. I mean, Craig did almost 40 interviews.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
35, I think, and many of them more than once, and many of them way more than once, to get the most unique, fascinating, and I think trustworthy representation of the story. And there's going to be a lot of surprises for people, all of which I think are pleasant.
Yes.
Connected to this very authentic telling of the story, and again another piece added to the legacy that will continue to ripple for past our time. These things. I think projects like these are just so important for artists and art that matter.
Yeah.
And when they come from this kind of a loving place, which can be rare for some bands, to have these sympathetic, empathetic characters that are willing to spend years of their personal time away from work and their family, when they partition that away to work on a project like this, when they come into the world, it matters.
With the box set, were there, knowing what perfectionists Andy and Roger are in particular, when the project was brought to them, was there hesitance about them giving sort of unpolished demos or anything like that?
Good question. That was one of my. I remember having a conversation with Kevin early on, knowing that kind of not reputation. That sounds a little coarse.
Yeah.
But knowing. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the records.
Yeah.
To know, what a commitment to the highest level, to perfection and excellence of inside of craft.
Yeah.
That the band had. That it would be logical to think that why would a band want to have that out there?
Yeah.
Something that is less than what was and what is. And just think through, all these bands that we know of and love that have never done that, made those kinds of things available, because what we have to consume as fans is exactly what the artist wanted to be representative. And so that was a concern of mine, and that was turned out to not to be the case.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which again points back to lots of people's incorrect assessments of how the participants and the creatives inside the band are.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're music fans, and they're musicians that do care about their fans. And
they're probably exactly the type of Andy and Roger who bought the Beatles anthology, because they wanted to hear those unfinished recordings or unreleased sort of gems and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, they probably, I can agree with that. They probably looked at it from the point of view of the music fan.
Yeah, and they were, the interesting thing in terms of how I think the box set and box set projects and legacy projects like this in general are digested goes is that they're meant for people like you and I, real serious music fans, not the casual fans. And we want that other sort of dimension, another point, another angle on which to sort of enjoy that experience that we already have embedded in our music loving soul, and looking at it with a different sort of lens, a different perspective and point of view. And almost always, they're never better than the originals.
Yeah.
But it enhances the experience and the deep appreciation and love for the artist.
Yeah.
When you have that kind of thing, because you can really see where they were coming from, and as a non-musician, all that sort of resonated for me was, man, this band just worked so hard.
Yeah.
And much harder than anybody casually that encountered the band when they picked up a record probably understood. But when you hear something like Spilt Milk, and I mean, right away that people who love music were behind this, were willing to spend the money to really allow the band a platform to make the best possible record.
Yeah. Well, one sort of, this is a bit of a technical sort of copyright based question. Were some tracks easier to sort of use than others? Like, if you used the demos of all the tracks from both albums, were they available to use? Were they owned by EMI or?
Yeah. Those weren't so troublesome.
Yeah.
Because those came under the ownership of the EMI flagship.
So you can use versions of the tracks, but not the actual tracks, sort of thing.
Yeah, and including some of the there was some unreleased material and certainly the live material where you had to go to those sources.
Yeah.
Um, for different TV stations in Belgium or the BBC and it was those kinds of recordings. The World Cafe in particular.
Yeah.
You just had to go through the proper procedures that they had for the licensing of those performances.
Oh, okay, I got you.
And each organization has a different procedure, and you just sort of have to go through the hoops and go through the process, and those are the things that took a little time.
Yeah.
With that made the project a little more elongated than I think was initially expected. But there was no rush.
Yeah,
And I think it was just a commitment by both Kevin and I just to have it blossom and come into the world as it needed to be.
Yeah, I mean, did that stuff cost at the time when you had to contact those radio stations? Did they?
Everybody had a different kind of rate, and that was negotiated.
I hope you don't mind me asking these questions, by the way, because I know it's.
It's kind of fuzzy.
Okay.
But that came under the domain. That was part of the service. In terms of EMI's administering the project, that EMI special products. Special markets, I think it was what they call it at EMI, as I recall, took over. So that was sort of less in my domain.
Okay.
More inside EMI's.
Okay,
so
cool.
That makes sense?
Yeah, totally. That's I find that stuff fascinating. So thank you for letting me ask you about that.
Well, hopefully other people find it fascinating.
So let's go into your past a little bit. You started Not Lame in November '94. So what did you do before that? Was it a leap into self-employment? Were you already working in that area?
Yeah, and I graduated college in 1985, but during college, I was like a lot of music fans in colleges in North America. We have these stations, as I'm sure you have in the UK as well, around the university system. And I was a music director and program director at my radio station, and was into that. And my wife and I moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1985. And I got involved with the station there, and the local music scene I managed bands. And I took a band that was in Boulder, Colorado, out to Los Angeles in 1987.
Okay.
And relocated there. And I interned at IRS Records, trying to sort of get a full-time gig in the music industry.
Yeah.
And managed record stores also. One of the stores that I managed was the record store that was in the movie Valley Girl.
Oh, really?
In the Sherman Oaks Galleria, for those who are aware of that area. And so I was interning there and the band that I managed was really great, but they were kind of a post Echo and the Bunnyman kind of band.
Oh, okay.
And back then it was all hair bands. It was hair metal.
Yeah.
In 1987 to 1990. And I guess it was an exciting time in retrospect. There was a lot going on in terms of the music business, and I got a lot of stories kind of connected to that. But for the band that I was managing, it was not so bueno. That really never went anywhere. I took a diversion to run a hair care company for 4 years. In the early 90s, 1990 to 93, and that was a very interesting, gave me a lot of good business experience. And my wife and I decided to leave Los Angeles and sell everything and move back to Colorado. And we moved to Aspen, Colorado, and we sort of showed up with no jobs and nothing to do, and rebooted our lives, early midlife crises, I guess you could say, because we were in our early 30s.
Yeah.
And my neighbor was Hunter S. Thompson, if you're familiar with him.
I know that name.
Yeah, he's a legendary, what do you call it, gonzo journalist, legendary author and writer, connected, good friends with Johnny Depp, wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas,
Yes.
and just a legendary, larger-than-life character.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was my neighbor back then.
Cool.
And so I was going up a ski lift, first powder day in November 1994. I was all alone. It was just absolutely stunning. And for some reason, out of the blue, I'm like, you know what? I want to start my own label. And I started thinking about all the different types of music, that what I'd want to focus on. And I was weaned on punk in the early mid 70s. I grew up in Boston, in the city, so I was fully immersed in the punk scene then. And Iggy Pop, the MC5, the Dolls, those were my bands when I was from about 10 years old on. Yeah. But there was tons of punk labels, and I wanted to do something different. And I was already talking to power pop fans on America Online, on their boards and from like 1990 to 93, I was connecting with people like John Borak and David Bash and Jordan Oakes, who ran the Yellow Pills fanzine.
Wow, even back then.
Yeah, we knew each other back there in the early 90s, and we were trading tapes with different fans, and I was hearing all these amazing independent bands.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just making great music, in particular the Rooks. And I'm like, why isn't anybody signing these bands? Why isn't anybody working with these bands? Well, I knew why, because people hated power pop, and it was and it was not cool, and that was all the more reason to start my own label, because there wasn't a power pop label that was dedicated to the genre. And so I decided, I've obviously been lifelong fan of power pop since it started, in the very early days of the early 70s with the Raspberries and Badfinger, certainly the Zombies with Odyssey and Oracle. And so I was well versed in the genre, very much so. So I was buying anything and everything in terms of the indie power pop scene at that time. So I got off the chairlift, and the first name that came to my mind was Not Lame. And literally, I got off the chairlift, grabbed a napkin, and scratched it down and some initial ideas, and I just never looked back.
Yeah.
And very quickly, just got the label up and running. And very quickly too, within the first year, I realized that there were so many other great bands that didn't have any distribution whatsoever. And a lot of them were contacting me, hey, what should I do? There were bands that I couldn't necessarily do a CD with, and I started a mail order company connected to that to help sort of represent and carry those independent artists and other small labels too, independent labels all over the world, and that proved to be a really, really big component of Not Lame. I did lots of mail order catalogs. I put up my first website in early 1995, which was the prehistoric days.
Yeah, that must have been one of the first websites ever, I think.
No, it wasn't that at all. But it was what you would call the prehistoric. It was prehistoric Stone Age kind of times in terms of the history.
Yeah. So in the 90s, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, in the way that sort of Nirvana was a reaction to sort of the hair metal, was there sort of almost a revival in 60s influenced power pop in the early 90s, also as a reaction to sort of hair metal as well?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a reaction to hair metal or grunge or any of those times, but there's no question that somewhere around 1993, I think there was a renaissance that was sort of blossoming up all over the place.
Yeah.
And certainly by the mid late 90s, I think fans of the genre at that time, for those that were there, look back very nostalgically on that time because there was something in the water going on. Like over in Sweden, for example, there was definitely something going on in the water.
Yes.
There were dozens of phenomenal bands that were releasing really great melodically driven, sometimes power pop, but certainly very, very melodic, highly crafted, what we would call power pop. And there were independent bands all over the place, and that's where Not Lame kind of stepped in. And I never had a plan. I started it as a fan, and I didn't plan on it being a business. And about a year after I started the label, I was doing it full time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of dumb luck. You know, it was just a good time because the internet was starting to explode. I don't think it was because I did anything particularly sharp or prescient or other than really following a subject that I knew a lot about and that I was an expert in, and I was very passionate and very authentically in love with.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of energy and emotion, I think, filtered out, and other fans kind of responded to the work of the label and the mail order company.
Would you say, in your opinion, that the renaissance of power pop around that time kind of predates the Britpop sort of revival, or not revival, but sort of the Britpop movement that was also influenced by a lot of those bands, but maybe had a little more of a harder edge? Do you think that if, for example, Jellyfish or Red Cross or those kind of bands, if they came along a little bit later, do you think that they could have just completely exploded?
Well, you have Britpop went nowhere here in the United States.
Oh, really? I thought it was
no. Yeah, I mean there were bands that got signed and that were picked up and licensed over here by major labels and large independent labels.
Yeah.
Almost all of whom went nowhere, literally nowhere.
Wow, I'm shocked. Shocked to hear that.
The only bands that really made any impact were the big ones. They were Oasis and Blur.
Yeah.
Elastica a little bit. I'm trying to remember if there's any other that really had any significant success sales.
Did you ever get a band called Space over there?
Oh yeah. Their records, they're brilliant. Those are great records.
Love Space. Yeah.
Yeah. They were picked up too, but they might have got a little bit of airplay on what we call AAA radio.
Yeah.
Here, which was sort of like a modern alternative radio format. And certainly college stations, but in terms of sales, in terms of impact, and viability inside the machinery, the business, they really, it's a footnote here. But that said, music fans, people like you and I, were buying these records, but more than likely, a lot of us were buying them in used record stores where the promos were dumped.
Yeah.
We weren't buying them new in most cases because the promos are just being dumped because they weren't really in demand. But I would say it was a convergence. Britpop sort of came alongside at the same time. I think this sort of developing renaissance going on in power pop. But I think at the time, fans, I don't think we realized or looked at it like, hey, we're in a renaissance. This is amazing. This is happening. It was just that there was a lot of independent activity going on where people wanted to make this kind of music that was embodied with layers of vocal harmonies and ringing melodic guitars and tapped into the archetypes of the Beatles and Badfinger and Raspberries and the Knack and other bands from the 70s, and reinterpreting those or being influenced by them. And I think only in retrospect, I think sometime in the double knots, we kind of look back and said, whoa, that was a renaissance, wasn't that? And it was like, oh, very cool.
Well, I think, when a movement becomes aware of itself, I think that's when it starts to get maybe ridiculous, because that's when you get sort of parodies of, what is that genre sort of thing. Hair metal got ridiculous, even more ridiculous than it kind of was by the end of it. I suppose punk probably got the same way, when people sort of jump on the bandwagon and realize that it's, a thing. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Yeah, it's not a matter of agreeing. It's just I think partially that's the case, but I think when you have movements that whether it's Britpop or the punk explosions, but things. It was like, for example, I can speak a lot about punk because I was there.
Okay.
I lived that, and and there wasn't the internet back then, and it was really hard to track down these records across the world. Certainly across getting them imported from the UK, in different countries in Europe, and even across the country. You had to handwrite letters, mail them, and say, "Hey, I want to. I can't find your record. Where can I buy it?" Because the independent labels of the bands that were pressing these records couldn't afford to advertise, and there wasn't a music press that was viable for them to even advertise in, and there weren't a lot of fanzines except locally inside these cities.
Yeah.
And so it was very, very hard. There was magazines like Bomp and especially Trouser Press that provided an amplifying message that we could receive and do research with. But it was very, very difficult to find these records and experience these bands. You only read about them with one or two sentence mentions in magazines like Rock Scene or Cream or Bomp or Trouser Press. But it was an exciting time. I think it was very organic. And when punk sort of came into the mainstream in '78, and then you had new wave that kind of grew out of that too, I still think it was very organic. I don't think musicians were going, "Hey, let's jump in this bandwagon." I think there was this back to basics kind of empowerment where people like you or I heard these bands and said, "You know what? Heck yeah, I can do that too."
Well, that's the thing with the synths as well. They were such an easy instrument to play that I'd imagine a lot of people sort of kind of started making their own music independently at that point in that sort of style. Maybe I mean this this is the point of view that someone who wasn't there at the time, but it seemed like sort of a lot of synth sort of records. It was holding down one button sort of thing or one key. And
well, I tell you, I certainly loved those early Gary Newman records.
Oh yes, same yeah.
I mean, those are utterly brilliant.
Human League as well, big Human League.
Yeah, when you got into the New Romantic and that dreadful gated drum sound that came to being in 1982 and carried on deep into the 80s. That was a very bad kind of embracing of technology, at least for my ears.
Yeah.
But there were some bands that I dug from that era. I mean, I definitely loved OMD.
Oh yeah.
Those guys wrote great singles.
I like a lot of the 90s stuff.
And Teardrop Explodes, and I'm trying to think of some of the others that I really liked. Of course, The Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen were brilliant.
Yeah.
And the Chameleons, the Sound, those were really, really important bands, I think, that sort of have ended up as footnotes of that time. That's more alternative, I guess, rock than what we're talking about.
Well, getting us back into power pop.
Yeah, we probably should.
Well,
Spin up LA! Oh my God, yeah, away.
It seems, looking back on it now, and looking back at there are power pop compilations that have come out in this country, and a lot of obviously all the classic bands are on there. XTC, Jellyfish even make it on these compilations, but a lot of the bands seem to be from the early to mid 2000s. This looking back on it now, there seems to have been some kind of mainstream peak of power pop at the time. I mean, is that something that you noticed? I mean, bands like Fountains of Wayne and McFly and The Feeling and bands like that. Is that something that you noticed?
Yeah, well, The Feeling certainly was in there. It's like nobody in the United States knew McFly.
Okay.
I mean, that was a band that had zero presence I imported some of their records to try to try to sell those and not lame, but they were so expensive as imports that it was hard to get anybody to take a chance on a band, because remember, you couldn't run to a website and hear sound bites. And one of the things that Not Lame did was every CD that came in, I opened up and ripped MP3 samples of anywhere from 2 to 7 songs from the record. And instead of doing the industry standard of 30 seconds, I would do a minute to a minute and a half,
Right.
Which was technically in violation of copyright laws at that time. But it was impossible for a listener to be intrigued and have their curiosity and their passion piqued.
But even with Power Pop,
to make an informed decision, that was the thing. I mean, to me, the mission was to inform and empower music fans with as much information. I did these very extensive reviews that I wrote up. I must have written 10,000 reviews of every release that came into the database, and then also the sound bites. Because I, as a music fan, it was very frustrating when you'd read record reviews that would drop names of bands that were inspired or influenced by, and then you buy these records and you're going like, what the hell were they talking about? They don't sound, anything like that band. And it's interesting pulling it back to Jellyfish. And these are one of the questions I'm going to poll here very soon, probably within the next week, of everybody that's on the interest list for the book. Is I'm curious, like, what are some of people's favorite Jellyfish-inspired bands?
Yeah.
And sort of gathering up everybody's different perspective and seeing if there's and trying to give a voice and a little platform to some of these bands. Although many of these releases may be out of print, but people can do their due diligence and research on the internet and track some of these great independent bands that were influenced by Jellyfish. I think that, and during the Not Lame years from 1994 to 2010, there was quite a few of them, and that I kind of would classify as Jellyfish inspired. And I think it's exciting to sort of to encounter that. But it's Jellyfish is one of those bands that it's really hard to pull. I mean, it's like trying to sound like Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
And really pulling off Pet Sounds inspired Beach Boys. It's such a difficult band to really mimic and copy. So your inspiration of that influence is really hard to pull off and present as being as good or sounding like.
No, I agree. I mean,
that makes sense.
It does indeed. I mean, I bring up McFly in particular. What was your opinion on that band in particular? Because I got into got into Jellyfish in 2007, and it was around that time that McFly released "Baby's Coming Back" and took it to #1 as well in the UK.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I did. Wow, that went to #1. That's fun.
From what I hear, that Alan Haber.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the name of the guy?
Yeah, Pure Pop Radio.
Yes, he's the guy. I might be confusing names now. Did he release the tribute CD?
Which tribute CD?
The Jellyfish.
No.
Alan something. That's really bad. That I should know that.
Why am I drawing a blank on that right now? Oh, shame.
We apologize if you're listening.
Yeah, no, I'm just drawing a blank on that.
Well, as far as I'm aware, he tried.
I did grow up in the '70s, after all, Pablo. There was, and that was some really bad stuff. Bad marijuana.
Yes. Well, here's a story. The first time I got high was with Eric Dover. So. You can't turn it down when Eric Dover offers you.
First time, really? Wow.
Yeah, everyone thinks that I smoke weed all the time, but I really don't.
Hey, I live in Colorado where weed is legal now, and I park my car less than 1 block away from probably one of the best shops, and I've only been in there once, and it's been open for like 1.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably doing record business now, is it?
What's that?
It's probably doing record business since
No, not really. You'd be surprised that it's such a non-issue.
Oh, okay.
That it's just I think there's just a collective shrug, like it's like what's the big deal?
Yeah. I think it
And
would be the same over
it's
here as
taxed, and a lot of that money goes into funding educational initiatives and infrastructure
That's cool.
initiatives where there's shortfalls in state budgets. And that's a positive thing. But generally speaking, more than 60% of the, I'd say 65% of the general population is thumbs up.
That's cool. Well, I'll before I sort of drag us into this decade. The thing about McFly, the guy who made the tribute CD tried to get that track on the album, and I think there was just copyright issues and the.
Oh yeah, major labels just you don't even want to go there.
Yeah, I can imagine
that was going to be way too problematic. To I would have I knew that would end up badly.
Yeah.
For that, like with I know Sensory Lullabies tried to try to do that. What was it? I think it was called Burning Sky Records.
Burning Sky Records, yeah.
Was the label that did that. And gosh, man, why am I drawing? And
I'm gonna break protocol and go on Facebook and try and find his name. It's so bad. I should know his name.
Yeah, I know. It didn't come out that long ago. I mean,
no, it didn't. But I got the chance to speak to the.
It was it was Alan Heaton.
Yes,
Alan Heaton. That was it.
Alan
I just
Heaton.
remembered. Okay, sorry, Alan. And Steve Turnage.
Steve Turnage, who
Seattle.
Steve was a big
also
help.
helped out on that on a lot of this sort of the mastering and the technical stuff. Now the memory's coming back.
Yes, and I know Steve helped out with Roger's first album, and I think he helped out.
Yeah, big Jellyfish fan.
Helped out with the Sextus album, and he actually mastered one of my EPs as well, which was a cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, the great thing about I guess that's why I was drawing a blank there, because it was sort of like Alan Heaton's involvement with that. I mean, came strictly from a fan standpoint.
Yeah.
And I love when that happens, because that's kind of how I started off, with just sort of following your passion, and you just sort of figure it out as you go, and you sort of jump headfirst into the process and into learning all this stuff. And Alan was like that, and it was really I just love. I try to encourage people when they do projects like that. And a lot of people would come to me with projects. Hey, would you be interested in this? And it's like, you know what? I think you could do this.
Yeah.
You can start this. There's another. I mean, there's all kinds of really cool labels that start that way, and you just sort of. I think one of the best examples is this label Pop Detective.
Yes.
Who's run by Mark Hirschberger. And a long-time not lame customer, and he just sort of followed his own passion with working with bands that he heard and said, like, you know what, screw it. Just like when I was going up that chairlift in 1994, and I'm going to do this. Well, yeah. Mark did that, and many years later, almost 10 years later, it's a very viable and busy and important label in the power pop landscape.
Yeah, it's crazy how much these names, everyone that you've mentioned, becomes ingrained in your mind, because in sort of constant connection with them on Facebook, and it's sort of great to be, I suppose, a very small part of the power pop world. Really, I think everyone.
It's a small world.
that is true.
It's always been sort of very parenthetical and operating on the margins. It's never really had its day. I've had one conversation in my town of Fort Collins, Colorado, in the 17, 18 years I've lived here, where, you always meet people and they ask you what you do.
Yeah.
And you just have your generic responses that you give them, and then you move on. And it's not cool to work in the music industry anymore. I mean, nobody has any, I mean, that's how bad things have gotten in rock and roll. I mean, when you say you work in the music industry, people look at you and say, oh God, I'm sorry. And that must be horrible. And reactions like that, it's like the scarlet letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so it is not a cool thing.
No.
But everybody just gives you a blank stage when they say, "Hey, what kind of music? What kind of music did your label do?" Or what kind of? And you'd say, "Well, it's this type of music called power pop. It's melodic, and
I mean,
like
exactly the same.
line
Yeah.
response. I mean, nobody. There's only one person in my entire life, from 1994 to now, where I've met in a happenstance manner where they knew what power pop was. And that was, I can tell you when it was. It was in early 1999 here in Fort Collins. And it was at a party, and this guy said, "Oh," so I said what I normally say, which is, it's, a lot of Beatlesque rock and roll, some very overly simplistic kind of phrasing. And he looks at me, and he goes, "Oh, you mean like Dwight Twilley?"
Okay.
And what else did he say? I should remember what he said. He said like Dwight Twilley and the Posies. He said Dwight Twilley and the Posies. And I looked at him and I grabbed him by the shoulders and I said, "You and I are gonna be great friends." And guess what? He is my best friend here.
That's amazing.
In Fort Collins, and we started a band together 10 years ago, playing old punk covers. From the 70s and garage stuff from the 60s, called Buzzkill UK.
Okay, I shall check that out. Do you have stuff online?
No, there is a video on YouTube of us at a little club. It's really bad of some stuff, but anyway, we so things like that. It's not a big deal. Power pop, unfortunately,
No.
and it's never had any traction. I mean, major labels. There was Matthew Sweet, Fountains of Wayne, the Posies, Jellyfish in the 90s that had some traction here, but they weren't identified with a trend or movement, or even there wasn't a discussion of being power pop because those artists didn't necessarily run around saying, "Hey, we're a power pop band," because it was kind of a meaningless term. And I certainly don't blame that. I would have done the same thing. It's like, we are power pop, but we're just making this music because this is what's coming out of our souls.
Yeah, I mean, your experience, what you just said there. When I try to explain the music I do, I rarely use the term power pop. I just say the Beatles because that is just the one sort of, or Queen to an extent, and everyone sort of gets that. I could happily go into detail. I mean, it's very presumptuous of me to compare myself to the Beatles, but I suppose in terms of the whole melodic pop sort of thing, it's just an easy thing to do. But when someone has heard of Jellyfish, I'm exactly the same. I give them a hug and I'm just like, "Yeah, come on, I'm buying you a drink. And we're gonna
As you should. I mean, and this is one important thing. Let's sort of connect it back up here for folks.
Yeah.
Talking about the band. This is the thing that really blew me away about the fan club project was, and this is important, and I hope people are kind of still listening, or maybe they're fast forwarding as we sort of bookend this conversation. I think this is really, really important to come back to and refocus in, is that this was a band, Jellyfish, that had a deep, profound impact for almost everybody that encountered their music or has listened to that music, even years on, for people like yourself, whether they saw the band live or bought the records. There was something that triggered inside, to use the phrase, the music-loving soul that was very different than most bands. It was very transformational, especially in the live context. For people who saw the band live, there was something very revelatory about the experience that they had, and I can't tell you the hundreds of emails that I got after that box set came out from bands saying thank you. This was so important to me. The band changed my life. To hear more of them means so much to me. And for musicians that saw the band live during those years in the early mid-90s, I can't tell you how important and how powerful of a life-changing, transformational impact that experience had on those musicians, because they gave them a true north, aspirational kind of orientation that said, this is what excellence and greatness sounds like when four people come together and work their butts off and meticulously practice and present to you, the loving fan here. We want this to be exactly as we need it to be, which is just the very best that we can give you. And it really showed so many people what this kind of music could be. Like the Beatles. And I think it's very, and I don't say that loosely, I think it's very appropriate when you're having a conversation about Jellyfish that you can very directly and appropriately and intimately connect them back to the grandfathers of power pop, the Beatles. Yeah. And I think you can have a conversation and say these four people, along with those four people, are in the same breath. They are worthy. They are worthy of that. And again, I do not say that loosely. I think it's very, very appropriate. And that is part of the reason why this is a band that will be discovered and rediscovered for many years to come, even after we're gone. Yeah. I think it's that. I think these two records have that lasting of a historical imprint. That is going to be their wonderful, beautiful fate.
That's a great epilogue for the band. Epilogue, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
that's good. I've spoiled the entire mood there by
or postscript. No, epilogue is it's appropriate because we're talking about this book, Brighter Day, a Jellyfish story coming out that's going to tell the story from that kind of fan perspective and really understand psychologically where all the participants in the band, not just the musicians, because that's part of the Jellyfish story, is this collective and gathering of lots of other visionary, talented, passionate people who had a job to do inside the story. Yes, and each one serving a very important aspect and dimension of the band. And a lot of these people, the story, when what we're talking about here with the band wouldn't happen. This kind of legacy of the band is not just all about, I think, the musicians primarily, of course, but it's also this story about other passionate music lovers with a varied plate of talents that they brought alongside the story, and help transform it and help impact it and make it great. March 1st is the date.
Yes.
That the pre-order will begin, and I know Craig was working on the cover today because he just asked me a question that the artist had about that, and I'm waiting for an answer to get back to Craig on that. Cool. So yeah, everything's moving along and coming together. It's real exciting. I tell you, Craig Dorfman is a really, really good writer. And as he's sort of given, there'll be more excerpts from the book that will be coming out here in the coming weeks and months.
That's great. Well,
he's going to be writing a lot more after this. He's going to get on a roll. It's going to be exciting to, whatever he writes, whether it's going to be biographical on another band or fiction. Craig is a really talented writer. So rest assured, in terms of representing the band, I can't think of a better writer to do this, and one that has been more consistently dedicated to excavating the true story, honestly and authentically, of the band, and then to bring it to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And know that we're going to the source, that this isn't any kind of hypothetical conjecture and masturbatory exercise on fandom of a band. No, this is something that has a very specific commitment to his own excellence.
Yeah.
That's very similar to the band, which is why it's taken almost 7 years to do.
Yeah. Labor
Seriously. I mean, I don't say that flippantly.
No. Oh, absolutely. Well, you've sold me on the book. Well, we should wrap up because this conversation was only meant to be 30 minutes long. And,
Oops. Well, I work alone.
Okay.
And I get a chance. I don't I mean, I work in an office building and there's people all over, but I'm sitting, this little office all day, and my wife's going, you need, get out and talk to people, and I do. I go to meetups and different events here. But when you work all day alone and you get a chance to talk to somebody that shares some of the same passions that you do, it's exciting for me too.
Well, last question. Do you think that with the IPO, like having shows in the UK, do you think you might make it over to the UK at some point?
I did back in the second IPO in Liverpool.
Okay.
Back in 2003.
Uh-huh.
But it's a matter of funds. It's expensive to fly over there and stay there, and the music business. Not Lame was never any sort of big corporate behemoth by any stretch of the imagination. But there's not a lot of money being made related to power pop.
Oh, tell me about it
these days.
Yeah.
So
I'm a power pop artist, so I completely.
That's part of my story, and I got kids in college and all that. So so it's an unfortunate matter of priorities, but
that's okay.
It's
well,
always in the realm of possibility. I had such a great time traveling around Liverpool and going to London. I was in London back last, I think, in 2002, maybe 3, when the Shazam. I don't know if you knew this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Shazam, but they were one of the more popular bands on the Not Lame label, and still to this day, my personal favorite band. Certainly, that was connected to the label. I just had so many favorite bands that I had the honor to work with. But the Shazam, if you or the folks here haven't heard them, you need to check out the Shazam. They are the embodiment of power and pop. They are just a fantastic updating of the Move and Cheap Trick with phenomenal off-the-charts, excellent songs. And anyway, to prove my point, Paul Weller fell in love with the band, and rightfully so, as did Little Steven from Little Steven's Underground, and who still plays the band to this day. And he asked the Shazam to open for him at Earl's Court in 2003, I think it was.
Well, I'm going to give you a little recommendation before we go. My friend's band, I don't know if you know them, but I think because of my sort of connection with the power pop world, I was able to introduce them into that world a little bit. They're called the Lost Boys, and Paul Weller is also a big fan of them, and they've recorded in his studio. And I'm good friends with the singer from the band, Daniel, and I would highly recommend their stuff because I think you would very much dig it. So I will give you some links. And I know Daniel will appreciate
please do, and make sure you and the things that we talked about here, if it's appropriate, with linkage, to add that into the show notes.
Yes,
the Shazam, they have a best of vinyl album coming out because their leader is a big fan of vinyl, and it's a beautiful package. It's sort of a greatest hits package, and that's actually a scoop because nobody knows about that.
Oh, well, okay.
But now you do, and anybody listening to this knows.
Well, the podcast
not that
will
big of a deal, but it's interesting.
Okay. Well, I'll be making an effort to put the podcast up before the release date of the book, because there are a few interviews, and it's just trying to not make them dated by the time that they or out of date by the time that they.
Yeah, very good point. That's easy. That happens a lot, as you'll discover as you get into podcasting. Because it is very labor intensive, and a lot of people really don't realize how much effort and time it takes.
Yes.
to do the whole package. That is important to do, and doing the research and linking up show notes and writing introductory paragraphs and things connected to it.
Well, just as an example, right now it's 1:38 a.m.
Yeah, and you got to interview David Bash here in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, in about 20 minutes I'm interviewing David Bash. So,
so I give David my very best. I mean, there's a legend in power pop himself there, and he's done so much for the genre, and he has a great story that he's going to share with your listeners as well. And let it be a story to know. I think it's important for people that are listening to a podcast like this to circle back to what we were talking about with Mark Hirschberger and Alan Heaton, and so many other people that you can do it. If you've got a passion for this, start a podcast. Start a label, contact bands, and make it your own. It can be done, and these are the things that make great and awesome things happen and keep independent music alive and vibrant and mattering. Is when people like us just say, screw it, nobody else is going to do it, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to figure it out, and I'll say this to your listeners as well, and I've done this for dozens of people over the year. If somebody starts up a label or something like that, feel free to reach out to me. I will do my best to be able to help and answer and empower and enlighten in any of these areas, because I really believe that it's that kind of punk rock ethos of DIY still matters, even for old middle-aged people like myself. And I think it's a great way to live passionately inside your hobby.
Well, that's the best. I'm glad that if nothing else, the listeners have that to take away from the show, because this is the podcast for the open-minded, and I know that this may not appeal to the wider audience, but I want them to check it out, and hopefully they learn something from it, and hopefully they discover new music. And I want to thank you for taking part in the show. Obviously, we went an hour over schedule, but that's okay.
That's my fault, not yours. I enjoy sharing this information and my own passions.
Well, I'm really thankful that you wanted to take part in the show as well, because at this point, like I said earlier on before we started recording, it's still an experiment. I've only been doing this for a few weeks, but it already seems to be building some momentum. I don't know where it's going to be in a year or so, but
and this is what I would counsel you and others, and it's something I always remind myself too. I think it's just important just to be yourself.
Yeah.
And usually ourselves, for people like us, are just like geeky, overly obsessive, crazy, we kind of off color kind of people when inside this, and that's what makes it work. And part of the story is, for those 16, 17 years that Notlame operated and ended up selling millions of dollars of this stuff, and help keep get independent, hard to find power pop and melodic rock and other genres related to that into the hands of people that cared about it most. And I never knew that would, what happened would have happened. I just started it as a hobby for myself. There was no business plan. There was no anything except a really deep passion to do something. And it was from hearing great bands that I thought deserved to be heard by more people than just this really small little world of online music fans at that time. And there wasn't even an online back then. It was just email.
Yeah.
But now we have so many resources at our disposal to make this stuff so easy and effortless. It's it's stunning. It just never ceases to make. It's just the most amazing time to be alive, breathing in and breathing out, standing vertical, to just have this encounter with technology that truly empowers the ability to build an audience, make a connection, and offer something of value, whether you're selling it or not, to people who will affirm you and your own passions.
Well, I think that's the best way to end the show. Bruce Brodeen, thank you for spending some time on Pablo's Poppin' Podcast.
It is my pleasure and honor.
Thank you.